Hello YouTube, Big Apple here. I've had some requests to do the installation guide on an Apex forward set Sear trigger kit, and since I'm installing one on my M&P9C, I figured this would be a great time to show you. So this little section I'm going to show you what to do with the frame. I'm going to include it in the same video what to do with the slide, but you'll see that later. So disclaimer, this is a simple process, but you know, perform firearm gunsmithing at your own risk. It's pretty hard to mess up this process, but you know, you should still know what you're doing. If you're not mechanically inclined, don't attempt this. So what's included in the box? Well, I'll post a link here and an annotation and show you. This is the polymer forward set Sear and trigger kit. There's also an aluminum one, and you can see that on my other two M&P videos because I have it installed on my core and the 40 that I reviewed. I'll post annotations to those. And the installation process is the same for both. The only difference is this one has a polymer trigger instead of an aluminum one. So anyway, the tools you're going to need, you'll need a small punch set, a brass punch set for removing sights, or you can use a sight tool. You need to remove the rear sight is the main reason for that. And you need a block of wood or an armorer's block for punches. So the steps, all right, let's get everything in place here. So I have this piece of wood with a hole drilled out in the middle. That's for me to knock these punches out. I can send them straight through there. So obviously first step, you know, do I need to say the gun needs to be empty? You should know that. Takedown, you know, your usual takedown, and then just take the slide and put it aside because you're going to be doing all your work right here. So I got my punch set here, and here's what you're going to be doing. Okay, step one. You're going to be rotating the small the takedown lever upward to allow removal, and so you can take it completely out. And use a small punch set to knock out the forward and rear takedown pins plus the trigger pin. So I'll show you those two steps, and then I'll refer back to that sheet. Let's get a little zoom action here. All right, so first things first. See the takedown pin? If you rotate it upward like this and you wiggle it, it'll come all the way out. So it may take a little bit of work, but there you go. Now the takedown pin is completely out, and we just got the frame here. Okay, so you can use a punch set to remove this roll pin, that roll pin right there, this trigger pin, and then that rear roll pin right there. All right, so go ahead and do that. Sorry if this is a little lengthy. So my punch set doesn't. All right, the first punch was a little bit of a pain to get out, so I had to just go ahead and do that off camera. So the second one, same thing, just knock it out of there entirely. You can see that's where it started. Then it coming out, I had to get these pliers to grab it. There we go. Okay, so that's the first two steps right there. You may see these little pieces come out. This is actually a pretty good thing for me to show you. You may see these little pieces come out, and what these pieces are, they go on here on the frame. This is a little slot for if yours has a thumb safety. So just keep track of these little pieces if that happens for you. So next step, after removing those pins, you got to knock out the trigger pin too, and then remove the main pin from the Sear block. So the trigger pin is that one right there in the middle, right here. So you got to punch it out from this side. You see this side is shorter right here. So this doesn't need to be hit as hard as the roll pins. It comes out pretty easily. So pop that out. You see it right here. Okay, hold on to that. And then you could pull both of these out right here. So use pliers, use your punches, whatever. That'll come out, and this will come out. This also is a good time for me to point this out. This little retainer pin here on the trigger block, you see it right there on the edge, that holds in the takedown lever, so you don't want to lose that. That's why I'm doing everything on this big mat right here, so I don't lose any pieces. Okay, and then this whole thing is just going to come out as a unit here. And you see the trigger comes out all together, and then you got your Sear block here. All right, and then you've got this main little pin right in the middle. That's what holds the Sear in place. And I'll show you in their package what you're supposed to do. So in the package it comes with this little set of springs. It comes with the new Sear. You see right there, that's the new Sear. And then it comes with these pieces, and then of course your trigger, and they have a trigger return spring right here. So there are descriptions to each of those pieces on their site, but I know the piece I'm going to need is going to be one of these little Sear springs here, and then that Sear. So you also want to punch out the little Sear spring, the Sear pin right there from this side. You see it's longer on that side than it is on this one. So this doesn't need a punch. You can just push it out by hand. So, or I use this little punch right here. Push it out. Get a smaller one. It's good to have a block of wood or an armorer's block to pick up everything because it's going to flop out. So when you pull this pin out here, you're going to see you got your old original Sear there. And then you've got this little Sear plunger down here, which is spring loaded, and that's what puts pressure on it. So when you turn it over, that's going to come out like this. That's one little piece, if I can get to focus, one piece with a little spring on it. Okay, so you can reuse this factory spring if you want. This actually is the spring that will give you whatever trigger pull weight that you want. So basically, the lighter that spring is, the lighter the trigger is going to be. The heavier it is, the heavier it's going to be. So the spring that comes with the Apex kit is a little bit heavier. You can use the factory spring. I want to use the heavier one for this one because this is a carry pistol. So for me, I don't want it to be as light as a competition pistol. I want it to be, you know, be a little heavier. So you see right here, you've got your spring on the plunger. I'm going to put that back in that spot right there. It may take a little bit of work. You may need to screw around with it. There you go. You see it fits in there just like that. Take your Sear, the new Sear, see that black Sear, and run it through the top. Get your Sear pin back. Put your Sear pin back through this side. See it right there. You're going to have to press down a little bit. It takes a little bit of work sometimes to get it to come through. Okay, you see there it fits through. And now your Sear's together. Alright, so the next step after removing the Sear, let's see, we got the main Sear and Sear spring right there, you see. Right there, I said there's two Sear springs available. You have the one that comes with the gun, and then you have the heavier one. Remove the trigger bar and trigger assembly. So that's this whole piece right here, that whole thing. So this actually just slides off. You got your trigger return spring that's going to be sitting on there, so that also comes off. You see around this little loop. It just pops off like so. And then you got your trigger here. And the pin that we're going to be knocking out to get this off is right there. You see that little roll pin in there. So get your small punch, knock this guy out. This is a little tricky because of the way the trigger bar is shaped. Or you can just hammer it directly into the wood if you have a wood block. Get it started. Takes a little work, but this will eventually come off. There we go. Now you got your trigger off your trigger bar. So you get your replacement trigger. It actually already has, you see it already has that punch right there. So this is just going to fit right on it. Make sure you don't install it like this with this part flat, or it's not going to work. It has to be this way. It's more of a pain in the ass to get it on that way, but that's the only way it works. So line up these two holes here. It is a little bit tricky to get those holes to match up, but it takes a little bit of trial and error. So usually what I do is start it a little bit and then kind of wedge it in the right spot. So I'm going to start it just a little bit. Gosh, should have made this hole a different shape. Alright, so after you work with the trigger for a little bit, like I said, start this pin in a little bit of ways and then try to make sure you get the loop around it there. You don't want to jam it too far, it'll push on this part, make it kind of bulge out or whatever. This is probably the most frustrating part of this installation besides the besides the trigger assembly, which I'm going to show you soon. So after you reinstall the new trigger using the supplied roll pin, which will already be on the trigger, you loop the new trigger return spring into the trigger bar hole, and then use the slave pin to hold the trigger assembly together. So once you have this, you've also got your slide release here, which is part of that assembly. So what you're going to do, I forgot to mention this. Okay, so get your trigger return spring right here. Put the small part of the trigger return spring through the loop on the trigger bar here. And it takes a little bit of work, but it's not too bad. I guess the easiest way to know for reference is that this big loop needs to be able to fit through there. You see the big loop? So get that part through there. Now you're going to put your whole trigger assembly together. It's going to feel weird getting this whole thing together, and you want to line those all up. And then they have a slave pin that came with it, which is going to be this little yellow one, or sometimes they have a little silver one, but this is just to hold the trigger assembly together so that it makes it easier to punch the trigger, the whole trigger pin back through there. So you're going to run this thing through here. It takes a little bit of work to get that slave pin all the way through, especially with that trigger return spring on there. But that's how it fits together. So this whole thing is going to hold itself together until you get everything back together. So let that sit where it is. Next step in the process, let's see, okay, then you got reinstall Sear block with trigger bar in correct position. Then you punch the trigger pin through knockout slave pin, and then you put in the forward and rear punches, and that'll hold the trigger block and the Sear block in place. So your trigger assembly, you got to put it in at the same time as the Sear because your little trigger bar has to activate the Sear in this area here. So what you're going to do, start your trigger through the hole there, and then start your Sear in the right spot. There are some little notches on the inside of the frame here that this rides on. So when it goes in the correct spot, you're gonna feel it slide in there pretty easy. So after a little bit of work, and you'll also see that the back part is going to fit flush here once it's in the correct position. But look down into the frame, make sure it fits. Okay, now I feel it starting to go. So once it starts to go, get the trigger lined up, everything where it needs to be, and then the Sear is just going to pop all the way down in there. And then now once you have the trigger in there, you have to put your whole trigger assembly block back on there. So now make sure that slave pin sits flush like this, and get your trigger block in there. It'll take a little bit of work here, but got to get the trigger block in. There you go. So see, now the whole trigger block fits in there. Now we got the Sear block in there. And now you got to drive your trigger pin back through there, which is the one with the big end on it and the small end on the other side. So find the big end, which is here. Okay, and start the trigger pin with your fingers like this. Make sure this block is down in there far enough. And then you just want to knock it through as quickly as you can, so you knock that slave pin out and you get this back in. And when you get it in the right place, you have to make sure you loop that trigger return spring right there, because that may have some issues. Okay, and then make sure your trigger bar is lined up in the correct place. I don't have mine in the right place, so I'm going to fix that real quick. Alright, as I was reinstalling the Sear, I forgot to mention this part. So you see your trigger bar interface is right in there, so you have to make sure you get that in the gap. When I installed this on there, this little metal piece here was not in that gap, and it was pushing against the Sear, so it didn't fit right. So that's going to fit down there, and you do a little test, make sure you got some movement there. You see that when I pull the trigger, it knocks that Sear down. So that is in the right spot. So now it's pretty easy from here. Once you've gotten past those steps, it's pretty smooth sailing. So reinstall your roll pins, and these roll pins are the same size, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you use one on one side and use one on the other, and you don't necessarily have to have a brass hammer for these punches. That's just how the set came here. Okay. I usually get them as far down as I can before I bring in the little steel punch. You just want to make these guys flush. Okay, it's flush, and then get this one too. This one definitely needs to be flush, because that's where the takedown lever goes. So after you get that reinstalled, to get the takedown lever in, you see you have to get past this little retainer right there. So kind of wiggle it, and you'll see it'll pop in, and then get it back in its spot. It just takes a little bit of work, but now you got that installed. So reinstall the pistol together. And you'll see that the trigger works. Right now it works, but I still have a crappy reset. So the reset's going to improve once I get the striker block in there. So that's the next step. All right, guys. So the next step in the process that involves the slide is right here. So I'll read these steps and then we'll just do it. You remove the rear sight first, and you're going to pull the striker back to remove the striker block. But there's a little black tab on top of it that you need to keep, so don't lose that. You're going to reinstall the new striker block with the supplied spring. Use the striker block holder to keep it in place, and then reinstall the sight back. So here's a little sight tool that I have. It's I forget the sight. I'll put an annotation with the sight, but you see it just has this little pusher on the top. And I put some painter's tape over that because that's actually what secures the slide in place. So, get my slide right here without the barrel and stuff in it. I'm just going to stick it in here. Know that these sights are dovetailed, so it does only go in and out one direction. And then I'm going to secure it in this vise, and I'm going to get that sight out of there. Alright, as you can see with the sight pusher, I did forget to mention there's a small set screw in here that you use to get the sight off. It takes tension off of the sight so it can slide out. Know that it'll only slide in and out from one direction because it is dovetailed. So with this little sight tool, once it's in place and it's coming off like that, you just rotate the screw either on this side or this side, and it takes it pretty much all the way out. And then once it's out pretty far, you can actually take it the rest of the way by hand. So I've got it to this side here, and you see how far out it is. And so the striker block, you can actually see it right here. There's the striker block right there. So that's the main piece we're going to be changing. So pull that out, keep this little black tab. That's actually pretty important to hold the stuff in. And then to get this striker block out, you pull back on the striker here, and you can shake it or push it out, and your striker will actually, the striker block will actually pop out right there. So get something to push that out with. So once you have it out, you'll see a gap right there. Here's the old striker block there, and the ones that came with the Apex kit are right here. So in this bag, you've got this little retainer here. This is the piece that holds it in place, and then you've got a new spring and a new striker block. So on the slide, so you see here's the little retainer, here's the new striker block, here's the spring. So what you're going to do first, you got to remove the little black tab from this thing. Like I said, it's important to keep, so hold on to that. Okay, and just put it right there. And you stick this little tiny spring with this little black tab on the top right here where it fits in it like that. And take your new striker block, as you can see right here, drop it into there where the sight goes, and then use that little black tab to hold it there. Okay, and then you're going to use this tool, push it down a little bit. It's kind of tricky to get it on there sometimes. Okay, then you use that tool to hold it there like this. Actually, I went through the wrong side. You got to go the other way. So use the tool to hold it in this way, because you gotta roll in the slide. The sight this direction. So I like to keep all my old springs. So once you get it this way, start pushing by hand with the sight here until it covers up that hole, like so. And so now the sight is close to being reinstalled. So I'll use my sight tool in the opposite direction to get it back on. So I just put it on this way. And I guess I should have mentioned that you can actually mark where the slide meets the middle of the or where the sight meets the middle of the slide, so you don't lose your center point. I guess I just use a little bit of trial and error until I get it about in the spot that I want it. But that's what I'm going to do here. So get it secured in there and get it started. All right, and then use this piece. Just screw it in here, and you see the sight just slides back where it was. The sight tool is very, very nice. I think it's only like maybe 20 or 30 bucks from a sight. It may even be less than that. It's a very, very convenient tool. Just have to make sure you get it in there secure. That one kind of slid off a little bit. So you get the sight centered on there. You can use a punch set, but I've heard from numerous sources that M&P sights go on extremely tight. So So it might be in your best interest to use a sight tool, or if you don't have a sight tool, then get a gunsmith to do it. Because if you use a sight tool, you do have the possibility of doing what I just did, just a little tiny metal chip on the sight right here. So once you get the sight back on like this, it looks like it's centered. I'm going to double check and make sure it is, but once you get that back on, it should look completely the same. Tighten this this bolt back down right here, this little set screw right here that holds it in place. And now you've got your striker block installed. You can see it right there. And so now you will have a little bit better reset with the forward set Sear and trigger kit. So that's how you install this. Alright, so after you get the rear sight taken off, you get your striker block in there. One thing you want to make sure of, you want to make this surface that interfaces here is catching that little bar right there, because that tab will prevent it from, you know, your negligent discharge, just like any other pistol that has this little tab in here. And you'll see once you're done that you want that to work, because that trigger take up is just minimal. So that really does transform the way that these shoot. If you have one for carry, really it's up to your own discretion whether or not you'd like to put this in, because the travel is much shorter. I'll do a sidebar. I'll try to do a comparison of this with a factory M&P trigger in the future, but you know, just side by side, see my accuracy and stuff. But for right now, this is incredible. So to sum it up, this absolutely transforms any M&P. I highly recommend it. And for any additional information, refer to Apex. And like I said, my disclaimer, this is a simple process, but you know, perform it at your own risk. And if you plan on using one of these for defensive uses, carry it or keep it next to your bedside at your own risk. So this is Big Apple signing out. Thanks for watching.